To our November 17th, 2022 City Council meeting. Appreciate everyone for being here. Our opening tonight will be provided by Councilmember Perry Oaks, and then he will follow with the Pledge of Allegiance, which we'll join in.
Sure. Last week is the election week, and I will avoid any politics. But what I want to say is, what I really appreciate about city politics here in Kaysville and in most municipalities, I believe, in the state, is that it is nonpartisan. We're not Republicans, we're not Democrats, we're Kaysvillians, or whatever you want to call us. And each one of the folks that are up here that have been elected, it's all about what's best for the city of Kaysville. It's not what's best for my party, it's what's best for the city. And even though city members may disagree with our opinions or the way we might vote or way we might think, I know after doing this for almost a year that everybody up here on the stand is doing it for what is best for Kaysville in their heart. And I very much appreciate, and I very much being able to serve with a body that has that in their best interest. And so if I could open with a prayer, and then we'll stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Our Father in heaven, we're grateful for this day, and we're grateful for this evening, and as we're here, as we open our City Council meeting. We're grateful for the opportunity which we have to be able to serve the residents of Kaysville. We're grateful for thy benevolence and thy hand over this great nation. And we pray for the leaders that they might make wise decisions and follow through with them for what's best for the residents of this nation. And we say these things humbly in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. So, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilmember Oaks. Appreciate your opening. We don't have anyone signed up to speak for call to the public. So we'll move on to our presentation and awards. I'll turn the time over to Chief Oberg to present an award.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I appreciate an opportunity tonight. You've met Officer De Los Santos, I think, how long ago did we swear you in? A year and a half? Yeah. About a year and a half ago. So he's a new officer for us, but if you knew him from an interaction with the public, you wouldn't know that. You'd think he's a 5 or 10 year officer. He does a fantastic job for us. But tonight I'm here to present him the Employee of the Quarter Award. This is a program, as you know, that our city manager put together some time ago to try to recognize the outstanding efforts of some of our city employees. And I think Officer De Los Santos is the first one from the police department. He was nominated by his peers, and the committee decided to recognize his efforts. Coincidentally, he just got back from the Department of Public Safety awards banquet, where they presented him with the Medal of Valor for about 6 months ago. He stopped a wrong-way driver on the freeway and undoubtedly saved a lot of lives in doing so, and was mildly injured, but he's kind of like my kid. He worries me when he goes out and does this stuff, but somebody has to do it. But in addition to that, if any of you know him or have ridden with him or spent any time with him, you know him to be an officer who's engaged all the time, whether he's on or off duty. He works 12-hour shifts, and we get 12 hours of work out of him at least every shift. He's a phenomenal employee, and we're fortunate to have him. So I appreciate the city supporting this program, and with that, I'd like to give him this certificate and the benefits that come along with it. So congratulations.
Stand in front, maybe.
Oh, in front?
Yeah.
You know, Chief, I didn't recognize you. I thought, who's this slick lobbyist coming in? Yeah. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Congratulations for that award. We're sure proud of you. I know when I talked to you after your situation on the highway, pulling somebody over or chasing them down, I was so impressed with the fact that you didn't even think about it. You just did it because it was your job and you weren't concerned about the safety or the danger that you put yourself in. So thank you for doing that. You guys are outstanding.
Thank you. Hey,
Thank you all.
be proud of your dad. It's cool.
All right, conflicts of interest. Council, do we have anything to declare? No? Okay. All right, we'll move on to our consent items, which is approval of minutes from November 3rd, 2022.
I'll make a motion that we approve the consent items.
And I second that.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Councilmember Oaks.
Aye.
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 Okay, thank you. That passes. All right, let's move on to our action items. Action item 6A, approval of a resolution amending Chapter 3, Housing and Neighborhoods of the 2022 General Plan to incorporate a modern income housing element as required by Utah State Code. I'll turn the time over to Melinda.
Mayor and council, it's good to be back.
Good to have you.
Thanks. Let's see. All right, so I wanted to just start with showing you the 9 items that we had in our 2019 general plan. The ones that are highlighted in blue are also recommended with this general plan revision that's before you. So in essence, 3 of those would not be new practices to what the city's been doing since 2019. The Planning Commission spent a couple meetings on this item, having some discussion, and so I'm bringing this recommendation to you on behalf of them. Again, highlighted in blue are the ones that were also included in the 2019 plan. So they are recommending 6 items, and the first one is to rezone for densities necessary to facilitate the production of moderate income housing. These are, by the way, word from the state code. Again, that's one that we've already been doing. The one, item E, is to create and allow for and reduce regulations to internal or detached accessory dwelling units in residential zones. R would be a new one if the council chooses to adopt all 6 of these this evening. And that would be to eliminate impact fees for any accessory dwelling unit that is not an internal accessory dwelling unit. The next item is to zone or rezone for higher density or moderate income housing residential development in commercial or mixed use zones near major transit investment corridors, commercial centers, or employment centers. And the last 2, item J, is to implement zoning incentives for moderate income housing in new developments, and lastly, to implement a mortgage assistance program for employees either of the municipality, an employer that does contracted services for us, like Central Davis Sewer District, and then any other public employer that operates within the municipality. The Planning Commission did discuss this last week at the Planning Commission. They held a public hearing. We did not receive any comments on this, and they did recommend the 6 strategies I just discussed. State code requires us to have 3 to be compliant. If we have 5 strategies, then we can receive some priority points, is what I would call, but priority status on funding projects. I did include in the packet the wording from state code that stipulates the penalties if we choose not to comply with the modern income housing requirements. I did speak with the state this morning. There's 83 cities throughout the state that are required to have the moderate income housing plan in place. This was due October 1st, and as of this morning, we are one of two that have not submitted the plan and is not in compliance. So they know that we've been working on this, and we're hoping that the council will adopt this evening, and then we can move forward submitting that report and become compliant with the state statutes. So we are recommending that the council approve the general plan as proposed by the Planning Commission. And I mostly just wanted to be very brief with my presentation to just leave the discussion to you and the questions to you as the mayor and council.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. We do have one person signed up to speak, Val Starkey. You'll have 3 minutes, and you know how this works, right? We won't respond, but you can go ahead and have your 3 minutes, and there's a timer on the screen, I believe.
Thank you for your introduction to me. We all support that. I'm Val Starkey, 573 South 350 East, Kaysville. I am in support of responsible growth. I like the ADUs. There are a few other pieces that are very positive. But frankly, the feeling I have is that a lot of this is coming down from government mandates, okay? Meaning it's politically correct, okay? And it's not economically justifiable without support from government. So my concern is that if we buy into this system of government-supported housing, what are we teaching the people who live there? I spent a year and a half in California. Many of my neighbors were on government housing. Most come from Mexico. So the question I raise is, who is going to be living in these places? What are we teaching them, okay? Because in fact, the reality is, none of this talks about why are we in trouble. Nobody talks about inflation, high mortgage rates, which also drive up prices, supply and demand. There's a huge number of people who want to move to Utah. Lots would love to live in Kaysville. We have family members, okay? But the reality is, prices are one thing, a fixed asset, number of square miles is a fixed entity. So in reality, we struggle with these issues. We want to obey government law. However, okay, another factor with the pressures are this open borders causes people to come into this country looking for low place. That's what we found in California, okay? I appreciate your assignments. And I understand, look, I've read through the amendment, but frankly, when I talk in front of people, I'm very nervous. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, council. So do we have questions and discussions for Melinda? Councilmember Adams. I was getting there.
It's fine.
You.
Melinda, so when you said that we're not in compliance, I guess I'm confused because the responsibility was to have 3 of them. Do we not have 3 of them? Like you pointed out that 3 of them were green. And I remember when this was initially done, Mike and I weren't on council yet. It was like right before, or Tammy, right? I mean, there was.
I think it was on planning commission.
Yeah,
maybe.
and it was right before, and they did adopt three of
No,
them.
we were on council, I think.
Were we on council at that
so.
point?
Yeah, we were.
Yeah, I think so.
We adopted
So,
3.
Yeah, we
so I
adopted
guess,
3.
yeah, what happened? How did we end up dropping the 3? I'm confused about it.
The general plan that the council adopted on August 18th does not contain any of the elements stated in state code that we would have to adopt. I wasn't here for that. I'm not exactly sure why that happened that way.
So inadvertently left off, or, we'll say it that way.
Do you remember that? I
Yeah,
swore we
Melinda, when
did.
you said there was 3 blue ones, what were you saying those 3 were?
Those were in the 2019 plan.
Okay, so in between the 19 and the new plan, the 3 dropped off. So we were in compliance before the plan we just adopted in August or whatever it was.
Oh, so that's what I was trying to say. So the 19 plan had those 3 on it, which made us compliant, but we didn't add that to the 2022 one?
No, it is, yeah, it's lacking. And they want us to adopt the same language from state code. Our chapter 3, the Housing and Neighborhoods chapter, just does not have those requirements in that.
So what are the 4 bulleted, oh, sorry,
Go ahead, Councilmember
our
Blackman.
4 bulleted things where it says meet the state requirements for affordable housing, accommodate a full range of housing opportunities to meet the economic lifestyles and life cycles needed, encourage the preservation to open space through cluster development of the foothills, natural drainage, and facilitate incorporation accessory dwelling units into existing neighborhoods. So there's 4 right there that I think maybe not be exactly worded, but they are in what I would assume is our current plan, because I got this off of our website. And so, and I think there's some other things in there that talk about meeting some moderate housing, 80%, because I know there's, when you look at the bill, there's 24 items in there that we can do, and I thought we had easily gotten the 3 out of the 24 that are there. They might not be word for word, but I think the intent is exactly the same.
Melinda, will you clarify?
Yeah, I mean, as I just stated, the state's expecting us to really adopt these word for word. And as the 2022 general plan is laid out, it just does not meet those requirements.
And I know as I read the state one, as it says in there, I mean, we were very careful to make sure we did not include exterior accessory dwelling units in our general plan. And I know under the state one, it also says, create or allow for reduce regulate internal or, it doesn't say and, it just says or detached accessory dwelling units. So I know that we were very much not in favor of doing detached accessory dwelling units. And so I'm glad that or's there, because I would love to strike that, and I think we could still meet the requirement for create and allow for reduced regulations to internal accessory dwelling units, because the states, and we've allowed for them in our plan. And but I don't think, I know myself, and I can't speak for the rest, but I know I'm not in favor of doing external accessory dwelling units until we've done a lot of studies. We've done looked at a lot of cities that have done that. We've had a lot of details for those types of things. And I mean, my experience with them, from what I have seen, I'm not ready to say that you can put an additional detached single-family dwelling on every lot in Kaysville, and that's, so I know that would be my biggest hang-up. And my other one would be, and I'll let you, and I'll be done when is
Councilmember
impact.
Oaks.
No, I don't want to stop Mike.
And I'm just saying, in the impact fees, I mean, when you build an accessory dwelling unit, you literally are impacting the system, you're impacting all the utilities, and I don't know how you can waive those, and because when you calculate services, like power is required to have, at least every house has to have a minimum 100 amp service, and when you figure out how big your substations have to be and whatnot, you take all that stuff into consideration, you divide that up to how many houses you think you're gonna have, or correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, and you figure out what that facilities, and then you figure out what those impact fees cost. I mean, it's a huge process of calculating and figuring out your impact fees, and then you just say we're gonna waive them. The cost doesn't go away, so you're really saying the rest of you will subsidize those additional ones coming in. And so that's not really all.
No, I just want a suggestion on
Oaks, go
how
ahead.
to address these. There's 6 of them.
Right,
How about we go
one at a time.
one at a time, and if there's issues with any of them, we have that discussion
I think that's a good
and then
idea.
move on.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
yeah, okay.
Okay, so let's start with A, rezone for densities necessary to facilitate the protection of modern income housing. We already do this.
Yeah.
Is everyone in agreement that we already do this?
Yeah. Is it
Okay.
just a matter of putting the language word for word?
Yes.
In that A? Okay, because I was under that impression too.
Okay,
Mayor?
yes,
Just on this one, is it possible, Melinda, for you to give us like a brief what moderate income housing is, just for people who are watching?
I
For
guess
all-
how the state,
For both of them?
yeah, looks
Yeah,
at what that is.
the state code identifies moderate income housing as anything that would be affordable for someone who is at 80% or below of the area median income. And Davis County, that equates to, it's about $83,000. And I believe that the formula is that no more than 30% of your income
Right.
should be going towards your housing.
It's
right.
It's insanity. I mean, we're never gonna meet that. This is, I like that we would try this, but I don't know how we could ever meet this. We've yet to see, I'm sorry.
Well, and obviously, we can't control that, but
Right.
we can set it up so that potentially there
So that
could
we
be
can try
success,
to.
so that we
Well-
could try. Councilmember Jackson.
So I have a question. So we allow folks now to rent out their basements to grandkids, college students, whatever, correct?
Yeah, internal accessory dwellings.
Would
are-
that not technically, I mean, is a rezone necessary if we already allow that within single-family homes?
No, it's allowed by code, so they just have to come.
That just
submit an
doesn't meet-
Application and go through our
Because
process.
to me, that meets that requirement. So,
Okay, so we're okay with A.
Hey,
We're okay with A.
Okay,
Yeah.
moving on to E, create or allow for and reduce regulations related to internal or detached accessory dwelling units in residential zones. How do we feel about that? So just to give some back history, last year, or maybe the year before, we introduced an ordinance that allowed for external accessory dwelling units. At the time, I think the council felt like, maybe we'll wait until the state requires it and kind of see what the state requirements will be in order to adopt that policy. The legislation that we're hearing that will come, probably this session, we'll talk a lot more about that. So I do like the fact that it says or, because it gives us the option, and then it eliminates the need to have to go back and redo that. What we will need to do is create an ordinance that creates the framework for external accessory dwelling units. So I'm in support of keeping the or in there and E. How do you all feel? Councilmember Jackson.
so reduce regulations, what does that look like and mean in real-world terms? 'Cause it's kind of fuzzy, it seems like, and so.
All of them
Well-
are pretty fuzzy.
To a great extent, the state forced our hand in this, and so we had to every city had to adopt an ordinance by October of last year allowing internal accessory dwellings in some of their single-family zones. So that's the reason why that text amendment came to the city council last year.
So does the regulation, they say reduce regulations, like on the type of accessory dwelling?
So, I mean, I think that's subjective,
Detached,
right? There may be some cities out there that have some very tight regulations. Right now, we require that you submit an application for the ADU. We do an internal staff review. It doesn't have to go to planning commission. Other communities have required those accessory dwelling units to go to planning commissions. So if we had something like that, I think that would be the intent of this language. We probably are meeting this one already with the code that we have. Since the code went into place last year, we've licensed a total of 7 internal ADUs. We're certain that there's more out there that exist and are just not in compliance with our code, but in a little over a year, we've licensed 7.
Okay.
So the reduced regulations, that's kind of, they're kind of leaving that open-ended for the cities to work that out themselves, it sounds
Yeah.
like? Okay.
Well, and I'll give you another example of this. The league contacted me about 2 weeks ago, and one of the individuals in the development community that has an ear with the state legislature is saying there's several cities out there that don't allow tandem parking to qualify for the extra parking for an internal ADU. We're one of those cities. And so that could be,
What-
you know, a regulation that we would reduce, that we would maybe allow tandem parking. I think that may come up at the state legislature as well. So that would be where, if you had a 2-car garage and you had to provide, you do have to provide at least one spot for an internal accessory dwelling unit, we would not allow that spot to be behind the 2-car garage. It would have to be over to the side so that you don't have to shuffle vehicles to get in and out of the driveway, because otherwise what ends up happening is people just park on the street. So, you know, that's another regulation that could be considered something that we would eliminate or reduce.
Yeah, and I don't like the idea of us getting involved in how people should move their cars. Or as long as they're not parking on the street, I think we should just leave it at that. Because there's a lot of homes in my neighborhood that don't have the ability to park a car on the side. And so I'm just, yeah, I'd be concerned about getting too specific on some of those things, but.
Well, and this would allow us to change our ordinance to allow it,
Yeah.
and to be less restrictive.
Less restrictive.
Less
Okay.
restrictive. Because right now, we don't allow tandem parking, but we could change that
Okay,
so we
I
allow
see.
it.
Don't allow it
Uh-huh.
as in.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that would be
It's just on
some,
ADUs.
Yeah.
right, so that would allow us some flexibility there.
So-
Okay.
Councilmember Oaks.
Yeah, see, and my concern when you talk about reducing regulations are usually put in place for valid reasons, usually for safety oftentimes. And so when it just sort of says, in my mind, sort of willy-nilly reduce regulations to make it easy for people to do this, that concerns me. Because even if it's not for safety, what if these regulations are in place because we as a city decided, here's what we want our city to look like and how to feel and how to be. That does concern me a little bit. And because what we put in here doesn't say how are we reducing and what's the purpose. If the purpose is to facilitate more, I don't know that I want more. I'm okay with internal because they were happening anyways. And this might be a way that as a city you're able to get a little regulation on those. I agree with Councilmember Black. I'm 100% on the external. We just flat out don't know the impact yet. And in most neighborhoods are built, and Councilmember Blackham went through it all. You know, you built things based upon, and you put the infrastructure in place based upon how that's going to be. So now if I'm going to potentially double, and even if I'm just putting a few more in, I think those regulations are there for a valid reason until we understand the impacts better. That's my 2 cents on that one. Or maybe a nickel.
Appreciate that, Perry. Did you
Yeah.
have something, Councilmember?
Well, I
Evans?
just, these are to be added to our
Our general plan.
Right.
Yeah.
So none of these are ordinance related in the sense that like, it doesn't, if we adopt any of these things, it doesn't mean that then somebody could just come in and apply for a detached accessory dwelling unit and it wouldn't have to go to planning commission or come to us, correct?
Correct.
And so like, in a lot of ways, I think that's why these are so vague, is because just like a plan, it still has to
We
be
still will
vetted
create
out, still has to be
ordinances.
vetted out, right?
Right.
And so, like, that's why I'm not as concerned about the language in each of these things, because I will say, like, maybe on other councils, the general plan is like gospel or law. And so a developer could come, no offense, developer could come and say, hey, it's on your general plan, you need to approve this. And I think there are some places that will do that. I've really liked that we aren't necessarily that way. We look at like the overall scope of it and we look at each scenario and it's like, no, yeah, even though that says our general plan, this,
Guidelines.
it doesn't, yeah, guidelines, right? So maybe that's something, I don't know if everybody was thinking that, and I'm just voicing it, but to me, that's one of the things like that makes me less worried about adopting some of these things into our general plan, because I don't think it binds us too much.
How are we feeling about this then, just
But-
overall?
Blackman has something to say.
Oh, I'm sorry,
yeah.
you did, Mike, okay.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is there's 24 items here. I don't think one of the three has to be one that's very highly controversial. I think out of the 24 items that are there are ones that are much easier to implement into our regulations, I would think, without having to do something that I think affects our existing neighborhoods so much and make decisions that way. But I mean, there's one that talks about helping out, you know, the employee, and there's all kinds. Like I said, there's 24 of them here on the bill, and and I'm just saying, out of the 24, that seems like we could pick 3 out of there that aren't quite as controversial as this one right here that I think needs a lot of vetting before we start putting it into the general plan and stuff.
Well,
Go
to
ahead.
Councilmember Adams' comment, this general plan, adding these into the general plan doesn't mean that we're automatically going to do these things. Another requirement the state has is that we state a timeline on each of these goals and an implementation measure. Some of those implementation measures have been listed as finding out what best practices are. Anything that goes through our land use code, our zoning code, has to go to planning commission first, and the city council is, at the end of the day, the deciding body on that item. And so even when, as an example, last year, the planning commission recommended external ADUs, and the council did not adopt that. They only adopted the internal ADUs. So the council will be the ones who, in the end, have the say as to how these are implemented or how they are not implemented.
Right,
That's
thank you.
helpful.
Really, the goal is to take the planning commission recommendations, because they've already reviewed all of this, and to implement whatever you're comfortable with into our general plan so that we have a guideline, a guiding document. And then the ordinances that correspond to this, especially, you know, and for the fact that we don't have detached ADUs, will be the guiding principle and the law that we'll create as the city council. So I appreciate that clarification. Which brings us to item E. If we were just going to take a straw poll here, how are y'all feeling about it?
I think since we kind of already comply with it, and in my conversations and in listening to the planning commission, it sounds like we're better off putting in things that we can comply with than things that we can't comply with, because if we won't do it, then we'll get dinged for it. So it seems to me like if we're already in compliance with this, it would be a good one to put in, especially if we consider the fact that it has a timeline on here. The planning commission, who I will give a little plug here for, many of our planning commission members are not just community members, they live here, so they know how Kaysville, but a lot of them are considered like the
Professional
top
planners.
in their field, like
Right.
not even just like professional, like the top, like people go to them. And I trust their advice, and so they're going to be coming up with these things, but then it will be us. And the timeline, 2023, they'll present an ordinance. Doesn't mean we have to accept it in 2023. I think we'll have plenty of time to vet it out. I feel comfortable with our ability and the planning commission's ability and our staff's ability to make, if we decide to do detached accessory dwelling units, something that we can all live with. And if we decide not to, I still think we're in compliance with that one. So that's why I feel like E is probably an all right one. I don't know. Anyway, that was my straw poll.
Okay,
Yeah, and
thank
I
you for that.
think, I actually kind of agree. I was on the fence because I don't want every other person in the city to have an Uncle Eddie move in with an RV and become permanent, but,
Cousin Eddie.
cousin Eddie.
Well, I guess he was uncle to some of the people.
To the kids, yes. So, yeah, I think the fact that it's kind of open-ended, we can really determine
How to craft that.
specifics and regulations around that, so
Okay.
I think I'm okay with that one.
Well, and just as a couple of examples, one of the provisions, if we did want to allow detached ADUs, we could say it has to be at least an acre or more of property.
Right, it doesn't mean every lot will qualify
Right.
for that.
So if it's something that council wanted to do, there are ways to ensure that it doesn't completely inundate a neighborhood or the community. But again, at the end of that, it'll be the city council that either implements that or they do not. And, just because we listed, these are the implementation steps, I specifically left that language very vague. Make a recommendation, take this to the council. I didn't say whether or not you would adopt it. It's not possible for us to say that. It would be foolish for us to say that. So what we would do at the end of the year when or in October when these reports are due, is we would say, look, in 2021, we allowed the internal accessory dwelling units, and to date, we have 7 that are licensed in the community. Next year, maybe that number is 12, and the state, we're reporting to them the progress that we have made. So what we adopt in this plan will really serve as the baseline for all of our reporting years for the next 5 years. So, I think that what we do have in place with our current code does fit this item already. And we would just report to the state, here's the progress we've made. And again, if at the end of 2023, that report says, we brought this ordinance to the city council and it was denied 4-1 or 3-2 or 5-0, that's what we put in our report. And,
That's great. Oh, sorry.
Absolutely, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think I like the idea of picking ones that we already know of a way that we're going to be able to report that we made an initiative to help with. That's the only reason why I actually am okay with E, in the sense that we already have a plan on how we can say, yeah, we've done the internal. And that's what you're saying, basically. This doesn't bind us to say you have to do detached. But we already have a way to be able to say how we've met this one. And I think that's the trick, right? Is that we don't want to be bound to have to do anything. Do you think it binds us, Mike?
Well, the thing that's got me so confused with this whole thing is, why is there a 2023 timeline to get the detached accessory dwelling unit ordinance to us? Why don't they put a 2030 on that? Then we'd had a lot of time to see how the internal dwelling units have done, still adopted into our general plan. You'd have to redo your general plan every 7 years. Is that what it is?
But I think that's why it says the or.
Yeah, but
We don't
what
have
we're
to
saying
do
here is
detached.
we're saying the timeline to present an ordinance for the planning commission for recommendations, seek approval from the city council is in 2023. And I'm saying, why do we have to rush something like that? Let's see how the internals go for a while and put a 2030 on there, and see how they do for 7 or 8 years.
And that's how it could be, though. Like, we would meet E, hopefully it's okay we're talking, we would meet E if we approved an ordinance by October that said, we're gonna allow, or we're gonna reduce regulations for internal units, and in 2030, we're gonna address external. Like, we would still be meeting it, right? Because
I don't think we would, because
because we've
this is
created
supposed
one.
to be a 5-year.
I guess what
don't
I'm
know
saying
the
is we
state
don't
would
have
think
to
about that.
allow for detached
Well-
accessory dwelling units or reduce regulations on the on the detached ones, because as long as we do the internal attorney, or means one or the other, right?
Melinda,
So-
where did the 2023 come from?
Thanks. I was just going to add that. So the 2023 date came because that work has already been done, right? The staff put forward an ordinance last year. My thought was that I would take that, kind of revive it, and bring that back in front of the Planning Commission and the City Council. So it was something where there wouldn't have been a lot of work to, collect data, to look at what other cities do and best practices. If the council wants to change that date, I wouldn't do anything past 5 years. I think that would be, I'd have to look again at the code, but they're wanting this to be a 5-year implementation plan. So I wouldn't do anything past 5 years from 2022.
Okay, well, I will circle back to your implementation measures, conduct research, best practices. It doesn't say we're going to have an operating ordinance that people can come in and use. It just
Yeah,
says
I
that
mean,
we're going to draft applicable text amendments, solicit feedback from the local community, stuff like that, right? So it's,
Right, I mean, I'm saying we're gonna present a text amendment to the planning commission and the city council. There's nothing in there that says one way or the other what decision the council will make in the end. So, you know, I tried to make this language fit with what the state is requiring us, and also be as benign as possible to leave the decisions to the legislative body, because it is not, you know, it is not our decision as staff to make. I do want to add that I sent my first draft of this, probably my second or third draft, but anyway, I sent a draft of this down to the state to have them review this, because we are late on this, and I wanted to make sure that we got this right. There were some items in there that they came back and said, this would not be compliant with state code. So what we do have in front of us is something that I have nearly 100% assurance that the state would look at and say, this is compliant. Now, again, we only have to have 3, we don't have to have 6. But what we have in front of us, the state would buy off on. I know they did notify several cities that have submitted plans that their plans were not compliant. And, you know, we just adopted this in August. We don't want to have to come back and amend everything again in the next few weeks, because we're not in compliance, especially because we're already, you know, almost 45 days behind the deadline. I know each of you, the mayor and council, we were all sent a notice of non-compliance from the state. So this is something that they've ramped up on. In the past, there hasn't been really any teeth with what they've been requiring of us, but there is. And you know, we're under a microscope. We're one of 2 cities that are not currently compliant.
well, and just the backstory too on this, the reason that this is required is so that the state has numbers to base their reporting off of. Because we were all told that we have to meet these goals of affordable housing, attainable housing, more diverse housing. And there hasn't been any data coming back from cities specifically to what they're actually doing. And so this is the state's requirement so that they have a baseline to decide, okay, which cities are trying and making an effort towards this goal of the state to be able to provide more housing, and which cities aren't. And so that's why we want to be general in this, and we want goals, like you said, that we will actually have a potential of meeting. But we also want to give ourselves the option of not being tied into something that doesn't work for us. So, okay, moving forward. So we have 3 yeses on this one. Councilmember Blackham, no. Councilmember, Oaks.
I probably would not be.
Okay, so no. So we have 3 and 2. Okay, let's move. Is there additional discussion, or?
If there's 3 other ones that we can do, I would prefer it to be like, let's keep going down the list.
Okay.
If we could, at least from, before I commit to saying I'm a yes on
Yeah.
E.
Okay, so keep
Because
that as
I
an
would
if.
rather see a 5, all 5 of us agree, something that's going into the general plan. I would prefer if we can find 3 that all 5 of us agree on. That would be my opinion. I don't know if that's
Okay.
what you were saying by
Sure.
saying.
Well, we can keep going then.
Okay.
Let's keep going. Okay. So our eliminate impact fees for any accessory dwelling unit that is not an internal accessory dwelling. So this is eliminate impact fees for external EDUs.
It seems like an easy one because basically we aren't allowing external EDUs, so we could say, yeah, we're totally eliminating the impact fees for them.
Except for.
No, I mean.
But the problem I would have with that is if we're forced to have
We're going to be-
external accessory units, I think I would not want to eliminate the fees. Because then, like Mike said earlier, then we're subsidizing.
Okay.
And I don't understand why in the world we as a city would want to give up revenue to make it easy for people to put additional rental units on their property.
I actually agree with that. I think that we should charge impact fees for external EDUs. So,
I have a
Scratch.
question.
yes.
What does that look like? Is it a one-time fee for connecting to power, connecting to water?
So impact fees are highly regulated by state code, and each of it's for a utility service. So each of our utility services that we provide has to go through a very rigorous process of evaluating what costs there are to add new growth to our system. So, for example, if we had to build a new well to serve additional residents with water, we would look at how much that would cost, and there's formulas. You hire people way smarter than me that, you know, that live, eat, and breathe these impact fees, and then it's allocated based on how each additional connection would impact that new service. So they are meant to pay for new growth, and the city council also adopts those impact fees. I think this is one, frankly, that I as a staff person, I would not have brought this forward as a recommendation to the Planning Commission. I think if we have new growth should be paying for itself. So, you know, that may be a little bit bold for me to put that position out there that's contrary to what the Planning Commission is, but there is hesitancy I think we as staff have with this particular item.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Okay, did you guys have comments? No?
Oh, just that I agree with.
Okay, so
Tanner, what's been
Mrs.
said.
Caesar?
does this one sound like a no-go? Okay, so we will scratch this one off our list. Okay, so we have one down. F, zone or rezone for higher density or moderate income residential development in commercial or mixed-use zones near major transit investment corridors, commercial centers, or employment centers. How are you feeling about that?
That's a good one.
We're okay with that? We
I
don't have a
thought
lot
that
of these
was in, I
areas.
guess I thought that was in the general plan, or at least the.
Well, it is, Perry.
Just not in the exact words.
Right, but it does state that. Are we okay with this one?
Yeah, and Mayor, may I
Yes.
clarify something? I asked Melinda on this one earlier, because I thought, I don't want to be forced to rezone, like specifically our commercial, but it sounds like it can be just near commercial, so it could be like residential that's near commercial that we're adding additional density to. So in case anyone was wondering about that, I thought we should cover it. Yeah, I'm in favor of that one.
Okay, thank you. So we have two. Okay, and then the optional, that were presented as optional. J, implement zoning incentives for moderate income units in new developments. Melinda, will you explain what zoning incentives could look like for us?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So it's easy to confuse zoning incentives with like monetary incentives, but essentially how I have seen this in the past is that, and let me use our RM zone as an example, which I think it's basically you can do 12 units to the acre with our RM zone. So we would amend our code. Again, this would go through Planning Commission and ultimately come to the City Council. We could amend the code to say, if you're willing to provide 10% of your units or 20% of your units as moderate income housing, we'll give you a density bonus. So instead of 12 units to the acre, you can do 15. Something like that is what zoning incentive would be. Or, you know, there's other things that we could do, a break-in, or maybe we allow for increased height if you're going to add additional residential units that would fit the moderate income housing.
And they would be set aside for that purpose. And-
Correct. Like
right,
that,
so that we would know.
That would require some, in my mind, some type of a development agreement. There would be deed restrictions. There would be a time period of, you know, this would have to stay moderate income housing for a period of 20 years. Some type of an agreement like that that would ensure that the trade-off for the city giving that zoning incentive, that we're getting that moderate income housing in exchange.
Thank you for that. I think in the right areas, it's worked in other cities for sure.
I'm curious about that, because if you allow, like if we allow a developer to put more homes on a piece of property, essentially that brings down the price of all the homes. Is that how we achieve the moderate income housing, or would that have to be a HUD approved, like federal program type housing?
So
I get a little worried when it comes to the government mandating stuff like this.
So there would be a variety of ways that could be done, but this is simply saying that we as a city who regulate land uses within our city would implement something in our own code that could allow for a zoning incentive. You know, it could be it could be also something, a lot of what's coming to mind, I'm sorry, is the higher density, but perhaps, we would say, look, our height limitation is 25 feet in this zone, but if you're gonna add, this number of moderate income housing units, you could go up to 3 stories instead of just 2 stories. So there's different ways that you could do that. And again, this is one where I'd really need to do a lot of research and find best practices on that because we want to make sure that what we bring forward would be right for Kaysville. And we are a unique community. We want to make sure that we stay, true to who we are. But those are some of the things that come to mind with those zoning incentives. So it wouldn't be anything where we would, give money to a developer to bring that in. It would just be, we provide some flexibility in our zoning code to allow for a little bit more to happen than we would if the moderate income housing is not going to be provided.
This actually seems like an easy one to say yes to because there's a lot of flexibility in thinking down the road on what we could or could not do.
I think this was the one that I gave the longest timeline on because I do think it would take a lot of research to get this right. And, the 3 years that I was in Murray, we did have a code that allowed for this, but developers didn't bring it forward because there's a lot of things that you have to do to make it happen. So, it's something that, we could put in our code, but I don't know how many builders or developers would actually bring forward a project like that.
They're not going to.
Can we designate which specific zones J could be allowed? Like maybe along only the city center and certain zones like.
Right.
In the ordinance, I think you could.
That's
So that
exactly
would be
what
allowable with the
Right.
state as well? Because
Yeah.
I definitely would not want to leave it an open door across the entire city.
No, we wouldn't.
What you have
We'll
to think
start getting
about,
all kinds of stuff every turnover of the council and whatnot, so.
Yeah,
I think one of the
correct.
things you have to think about is that, again, the moderate income housing, like Melinda stated, is based off of our area that's like $80,000 median income. And that they say 40% of that is what the moderate mortgage rate would be. So for a developer to take advantage of this and build moderate income housing, they would essentially, like you said, they would have to build all of them at that,
Along the
or at
city.
least some of them at that price range. It doesn't make sense from an economical standpoint for them to do that.
I
But to
guess-
give them the option to do it would be great, because it'd be like, hey, this is great. Like, yeah, if you're willing to come in and build some homes that can sell for $240,000.
Well, they would just charge more
$1,000.
for the others, but,
But, yeah, I mean, they'd have to figure out a way to do that, though, and that was where our ordinance would come into play. It's
Right.
like, we wouldn't say like, oh, you can build, 10 McMansions and then 2 little shanties next to them. Like, that doesn't work. You'd have to figure out like a way to make it so that they all are using the same components, they're all using the same build quality, like it'd have to pencil. So like you said, I think that it would, once you define it through the ordinance, I think that it would all come to,
okay. Okay, so it sounds like we're feeling good about that one. Am I speaking out of turn? Okay, so J. So we have 3. And then let's look at N, implement a mortgage assistance program for employees of the municipality, an employer that provides contracted service to the municipality or any other public employer that operates within the municipality. Melinda, will you explain how this could potentially work?
Yeah, there have been a number of cities across the state that have already implemented plans like this. I know South Jordan has. I think there were a couple other cities in the Salt Lake area that have done this. So essentially, what we would need to do, because mortgages are very complicated, we would need to, first of all, figure out what criteria we wanted to allow in a program. And I would also envision that this is something that would come to the city council for approval. But we would look at the criteria of what we would want to allow, and maybe we start with our own employees. We set up those criteria and determine how much of a down payment assistance would be something that would be helpful. And then we would implement that. And how that usually works is that you get, you would get a let's just say $25,000 down payment to assist you. Maybe we say you have to be a first-time home buyer, you have to be, a city employee, and what happens then, we would bring in or contract with an entity that has expertise in these types of things. NeighborWorks is a group that I've worked with in the past. They would handle all of the income qualification. They would handle the working with the mortgage companies to put the mortgages in place. And then at the end, what happens is the individual receiving the down payment assistance would have a lien recorded against their property. So if you're in this home for 5 years, the $25,000 gets granted to you. But if you sell it 4 years, you have to pay back, 85% or whatever those criteria are that we set up.
Okay.
So this again is something that would take, I think, several years to develop. One of the things that we are hoping to do in the next few months is bring forward to the county and other taxing entities in the city council the community reinvestment area for Main Street. That project area will have a mandatory set aside for affordable housing that the state requires. And that would be, in my mind, the funding source that we would use to implement a program like this.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Jackson and Councilmember Hunt, did you have something you want to share with us?
I was just going back to Jay, running scenarios
Okay.
through my head. I'm so concerned about that. But N, I think it's a little premature to adopt N at this point.
N? Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Or N, what we're talking about right now, I think it's a little premature, and I would not feel comfortable
On N?
with N.
You're talking
yeah.
about N, okay.
But I still have some issues with J. I was combining both.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Councilmember Adams, go ahead.
Well, I was ready to make a motion, but now Councilmember Jackson's kind of thrown a wrench in my whole let's have 5 of us agree. Because I was going to say I'm comfortable making a motion that we approve A, F, J, and N. But, what?
No, sorry.
I'll make them, well, it just goes against.
Is that your
Why aren't
motion?
you okay with J and N?
Okay, so.
Wait a second, so question.
I'm not going to
Wait,
make a motion. That's what I was going to do, was
You're
make a
rescinding your
motion.
motion?
Well, I didn't really make it. I was just saying I was going to, but then it's kind of ruined because I wanted to have all 5 of us agree on this, but he just said
Well, I
J and
wouldn't
N, so
mind
it kind of come across.
talking about it for
Councilmember
just another
Jackson?
minute.
Okay,
Because maybe I'm not understanding it. But, so with the J, what I'm concerned about is, yeah, that will likely happen along the city corridor, high-traffic areas. But if someone decides they want to develop their property, their 1 acre, and change the zone, so they change it, and it goes through planning committee and a future council, let's say. Then suddenly J comes into play, and I'm just uncomfortable with the future of the city allowing for a home to be built that's much higher than the homes next to it, or certain things like that. And so that's why I kind of wanted it specific.
I think there's a misunderstanding, because this is for
Okay.
new developments. This is not on say, an acre parcel, I don't see. Because it
But-
talks about in new developments.
New developments,
Which I see is, you're taking 10 acres and you're going to put a bunch of homes there and not on a lot. Am I wrong in that?
that would be a new
Also-
development.
Also, just keep in mind that the general plan does not obligate you to do anything. It doesn't obligate you to rezone anything. It doesn't obligate you to add accessory dwelling units. It just sets the course of what you want your city to look like. So implementing this does not do anything. It doesn't, you still have to take all these other action steps to allow for building
Right.
heights and zoning and ordinances. If you wanted to limit this to zoning incentives for certain zones, this is not where you would do that.
Okay.
This gives you the ability, or that you're saying, we're open to this kind of thing. This might be something that works in our community. Here it is in the general plan. But in order to do this, we're going to do it only in our RM zones
Yeah.
and things like that. So you could limit it in the zoning.
And that's what I would
code.
prefer, to
Yes.
limit
Okay.
where this can take place.
Which we'll be able to do with the ordinance.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's clarification. And then N, you mentioned the funding source, that would be a future funding source to come back and kind of pay for that. And so that's why I thought it might be a little premature to approve that at this point.
And yet I thought Melinda's timeline on this was actually pretty good, because it puts out to like 2026.
Yeah.
It, you know, so it pushed it down. It's not starting tomorrow or next year. It says, let's look into this, you know, potentially do it, and maybe start, if we find that funding source, no earlier than 26.
It'd be nice if N would say. If it would say, work toward, or look, you know, that's a really good idea, but I don't know, Melinda, do you think that we're obligated to implement a mortgage assistance program even if the RDA
Doesn't get approved
doesn't go
or-
through like we
yeah.
wanted to? I mean, I still don't feel like this obligates us to do that, but we kind of make a soft commitment to do it, and so, you know, somebody might get mad at us.
And which
We're not-
employees?
We're not legally bound to do this.
And
mean,
which
it's-
employees would that refer to? Just any employee, or?
We'd have to set
depends.
criteria.
Right.
Okay.
So this would just, again, kind of the same thing. It would just set a course, like saying, we're interested in this. I don't like the wording implement.
Mhm.
I would like it to say,
Consider.
Pursue.
consider would be a great word.
Yeah, I like that, because I would
But
absolutely.
it's
open to
changing that word, not complying with the whole, not only spirit of this whole exercise, but the legal obligation that we have to do so. So, you know, if we're not gonna do it like this, should we just scrap it altogether?
Mayor, can I just say,
Absolutely.
everything in your general plan, though, has that implication, that you're going to consider these things.
Okay.
You're going to strive to do these things. There's nothing in a general plan, now, Councilmember Blackman's right, often developers will come in and say, it says
says
this in your
this.
general plan, and they'll use it occasionally as a stick to hit you with, to do what you want them, what they want you to do. But there's nothing in a general plan. The general plan is a very aspirational document that Ms. Greenwood primarily uses to take the generalist policy direction that the council gives and apply that as the city develops. So there's an implication on every one of those that we're going to consider that. We're going to strive to do that. There's nothing that says we are absolutely going to have a mortgage assistance program by 2026.
Which is cool. It's a cool thing in theory, I think, to help employees and want them to live in our city if we can. And so that's why I was like, oh yeah, this is a good one to see if we can make it work.
My biggest worry would be not now, because I think we have fantastic staff in the city, our council, I mean, we're really on the ball, but I'm looking 10 years out from now. All new people interpreting what we do today slightly differently than how we intended. And so that's my only hesitation about it. So I'm not a hard no on it by any stretch of the means. but-
Okay.
I'm ready to make a motion.
But before you make your motion, I just wanted to circle back to E. I know that, so the metrics that we're reporting back to the state will be tied to numbers, obviously. We already are allowing internal EDUs, and it shows progress on our part. I mean, so I would just like to maybe for your consideration say, hey, we think about E again, and then extending the timeline of the deliverable. Not making it due in 2023, give us a couple of years, because external ADUs, I promise you, are going to be introduced again as a state requirement. And like Melinda said, we don't have to allow it on every single lot. A lot that's a quarter of an acre and an eighth of an acre where I used to live is not going to have enough space to put an external ADU. So I just would like to maybe ask you if you'd be willing to reconsider with a longer timeline, because I think that we're going to have to do it anyway. And it is appropriate in some areas. There are people with some really large lots, even a half-acre lot that has plenty of room for another unit. And I do think that that is us doing our part. And I really don't believe, because these properties are going to be expensive to build. I don't believe everybody's going to jump on the bandwagon and want an external ADU. It's going to be expensive to build this. So I think for those handful of people that will want to do this in the future, I think it's a great option to use their land space. So up to you guys, obviously, not my decision because I'm not a voting member, but just wondering if you'd be willing to consider it.
Can I add to that,
Yes.
Mayor? Because you bring up a really good point. You know, when we talk about these changing property zones, especially on the west side where properties are a lot bigger, folks are very hesitant to do that because they want to preserve the neighborhood, the reason why they built a home in the first place. But we are all going to age, and I imagine a lot of folks that don't want to see those change will probably need to build patio homes in their own backyards without stairs eventually. And so I do think, I agree with you, that allows us room to allow people to do that. But I'm kind of going back on the whole N one. I think I'm a no on N.
Okay, so
But I'm a yes on J.
is anyone going to reconsider E first? And if you don't want to, that's fine. So no, Mike, Perry.
Can I make a motion?
If we put the ordinance out a year, I would.
Okay,
I still don't know that I would ever,
both.
it'll depend, it'll be a case by case, you know.
And it
but-
doesn't mean that we have an ordinance. in
no, I
play.
gotcha, I
Okay.
gotcha.
Okay, so you're a yes if we extend the timeline.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Okay? Abby,
I'm still a yes.
you're a yes?
I think
And
I'm a
then
yes
Nate,
if we
okay.
extend the timeline, yeah.
Okay, so go ahead and make your motion knowing that we do have 3 on E and we've got the others.
Mayor?
Except we don't have N,
I
right?
don't think John's
We-
motion was going to include it.
It wasn't.
Okay,
Can I say something real
yes,
quick
absolutely.
before the motion?
Yes.
Unless we're questioning N, and I'll talk about that in a second. I guess just the thing on E is if we can get 5, we do get some additional consideration. And I was
We do.
speaking with staff, and I don't think this has been brought up, but approximately, I think, $1 million of what we use in this city comes from these funds already, right now. So if we, I mean, and I don't like being strong-armed more than anyone else, but I've never played a game or a sport where you win by not playing. And I'm not saying I, necessarily want to be a pushover, but if we've already got 4, I would say it would be a prudent idea to go with 5, just to increase our chance of getting funding so that we don't have to burden the taxpayers with that $1 million that they're holding over our heads.
Oh, okay.
And Blackham, can I say one more thing?
No, I'm sorry.
And then on N, I think I would feel remiss if I didn't add that N is something I've been passionate about since I got onto the Planning Commission. And I've brought it up with Melinda multiple times in different formats, saying, is there something that we can do to help people be able to live in Kaysville? Because I think it is a great tragedy that many of the people who work here and who serve us cannot afford to live in our city. And if we find that it's feasible to have a funding source later and can do that, I think we should put it in just on the fact that if it's something that we can do, we will, and if we can't, we'll look other ways, I guess. So I just wanted to add that, sorry.
Well,
Thanks.
no, and that was a good
Councilmember
point, and I
Blackham.
would just add, I interviewed a principal from one of the elementary schools in Kaysville this week, and, in years past, they've had 6 kindergarten classes. This year, they have 2. And that's because we don't have housing that people can afford with young families. And so that is the goal of this update. This is what the state's requiring us to do so that we can be team players. I realize Kaysville does not want to look like many other cities, and I'm 100% willing to protect that. But I think that where we can do our part, we should. So go ahead and I'm sorry, Councilmember
Well,
Blackham. you
all
had
I want
something
to say is if you're trying to get 5, then you could put another one in here. There's one in here that says amend land use regulations to eliminate or reduce parking requirements for residential development where a resident is less likely to rely on the resident's own vehicles, such as residential developments near major transit investment corridors or senior living facilities.
What
You
letter
c-
is that one?
That one
That's one of the
is
24 that's not on here.
H, I believe.
Okay, I'll make a motion
And
that
we don't even have to understand it to agree with
And-
it.
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we approve A,
Yes.
F, J, N, N, What was that last one you read?
And we could do H out
And
of,
H.
which is out of the legislative.
That does 5.
That's 5.
That does 5.
I need you to explain H in layman terms before I can.
So what it's saying is, right now, we have a certain amount of parking stalls required for every residential unit, okay? So what H is saying is, if you're gonna allow some higher density along a corridor where you have mass transit, like we have the bus along Main Street, then you can reduce those parking requirements to a lower number.
So less parking
Yeah,
stalls.
instead of saying 1.5 per dwelling unit or something, it'd be 1 per dwelling unit, or 0.8 per dwelling unit.
So they're riding the bus or they're riding.
Because you're encouraging people to live in an area where they use mass transit and don't rely on cars. You may have a young couple, instead of having 2 cars, one rides a bus and the other one has a car, and so you can reduce your parking requirements for something
But we
like
still
that.
have a say in that.
We still would have to
Case
make an
on-
ordinance
case
to
by
say,
case.
yes.
100%.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
you could
that-
adopt that one and you would get your 5.
Bingo. That was my motion. Anybody gonna second it?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Councilmember Blackham.
Aye.
Aye. Oh, sorry.
Aye.
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 Okay, motion passes. Thank you, council, for that. Okay, we'll move on to,
Do you know, Melinda, did you get that?
Yes, but since you changed,
You may have to
I
rewrite.
am going to have to rewrite timeline and implementation measures, so
so this doesn't get approved.
So this doesn't, it's not binding?
And so the ones that we did approve
Well-
were A, F, J, and N, right? A, F, J, and N, and then,
A, F, J, and N.
F, J,
I mean,
H.
if the
Can you not
council's
just-
comfortable with me
And
doing
then
that
H
without
and
you
N.
I
seeing
thought it was
it.
H.
Can you just mirror, can you just mirror exactly what?
I don't think there's any reason why they need to see
I-
the general plan done to their,
So A,
Yeah, because
you know, if you
you
include the 5, that's all that matters.
you see the ones that we're
did we approve
not
that?
including, and so I would think by adding the parking one's pretty simple.
Okay.
If you write it exactly as the state has said it, won't they approve that?
Well, yes, but the individualized portion is the timeline
Yeah,
and the implementation measures.
yes, that we're,
So you're not going to get an opportunity to see.
what that
in-
looks like?
In hindsight, what, I mean, we can bring
Okay.
them back to you, but I
But this
think what
has-
we're going to do is do what you just said to do
Yeah.
and send it to the state.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right,
And hope
so we
that
don't review
they're
it.
fine with it, which I'm sure that they will be. And then if you want us to share that back with you, this is what we submitted, we can, general plan can be changed anytime you want.
Okay.
But we're looking for being in compliance. That's job 1 right now.
So if it comes back non-compliant, you'll let us know?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
They will let all of you know.
Oh, I'm sure they will.
Probably, and they'll shame us in other ways too.
Yes, they will. That's always fun. Okay, all right, thank you. So, let's see. Okay, let's move on to our work item, 7A, discussion about interfund transfers. I will turn the time over to Shane.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you.
I'm just going to kick this off, and I think you'll probably have questions. And we've got Brian and Dean here to answer everything. Brian and Dean know everything. Did I say that? So I think at the last meeting, we received 2 clear directives from you. One was to have Brian at least come, maybe it was Brian and Dean, to talk about some of the needs of the power department, what that looks like. So we have, he's provided a document that we are going to, yeah, Dean, would you move to that? The first one you're going to see is needs, and he's projected some needs out to 2023. I think the total of those needs is about $13 million over 7 or 8 years. And then the next document after that you would see is going to be where we are today, which is more of questions for Dean. And that one has, we have about $9 million in our just general fund, rainy day fund. We have another $2 million in reserves, kind of the reserves that are intended to mitigate the up and down of our resource costs. And then we have another $2 million in impact fee funds, Yeah, and I'm making some pretty round numbers here, so just take that for what it's worth, and he's got the real numbers in there. And I think and the second thing that we think we heard from you last time is to come up with an ordinance that would essentially give us the ability to do this, so we wouldn't be restricted in doing it. And I think Councilmember Adams would like to have that ordinance have a little bit of a nod to, we're going to try to do this responsibly, and that we don't want to maybe go back to exactly where we were pre-Proposition 5. Yeah. And I think we did that. I think Nick came up with something that you at least can review and review, and I think it kind of did a good job of that, and of course you're good.
Yeah.
And of course we can talk about that. So those two items I think are on the table tonight, and if you want a proposal from the staff, we met a couple times in between these two meetings, and I think we'd recommend that we move the ordinance to an action item at the next meeting. I think that the fiscal year 24 budget could be a time when we can really dive into some of this stuff in great detail, and we would recommend that maybe every year you do allocate $0 from the power fund up to what Bountiful does, which is 10%, and that's $1.5 million-ish, and I think we could do that on a year-by-year basis, and I think that's something we can do, and probably some years it would be better to do $1.5 million, and some it would be better to do almost $0, so, and I think we can do that together. So with that being said, if you have any questions about some of the things on Brian's list, I don't know how much we want to get into. What's the transformer in 2027? That might be hard for us to pin down, but.
And so should we talk about the amendment to the ordinance first, or do you want to talk?
Whatever you want, Mayor.
Okay.
That's kind of all I wanted to say. I just wanted to kick this off, and
Okay.
obviously we're here for questions, so.
Okay, all right. Let's talk about just trying to think here. Let's go ahead and turn the time over to Levi, or to Dean.
Thanks, Dean.
Thank you.
I think what he's handing you out on page 1 is what is projected up there, just for the public and anyone else.
Do you have some bifocals?
Some magnifying glass?
It's a little
It's a
small.
BYOB situation.
Right.
You got to bring your own bifocals.
Probably got an extra pair or two.
John,
No, it's okay, I can see it now. It says Dean approves.
Right. Okay, Brian, go ahead.
I guess I'm just
You're here for questions?
here, for questions, anything you may see on that. What you just barely received is just it's a compilation of a number of different things. The main format of this was coming from ECI, Electrical Consulting Industries, and so that's who we hired multiple years ago, I think back in like 2018 or 17. They did a study, a load study of our infrastructure over our whole entire city. And the recommendations that they came back of the things that were of most significance that needed attention immediately, up to a breakdown of years down the road that they would recommend we focus our attention on. And then we took their study and we intermingled it with up-to-date issues that we are seeing outside of our main feeders. ECI only did a study on our substations and the main feeder lines throughout the city. They didn't. The study didn't include, lines, lateral lines going out into subdivisions and those types of things. And so we've added things like the boring of new conduit and the rebuild of our 2400 system, things like that that wasn't in the ECI study. So basically, that's what this list is. It's just kind of a breakdown of a projected implementation of improvements that we want to do over the course of the next 10 years.
question.
Councilmember Oaks.
So, I look out in like 25, 26, 27, and the numbers are pretty, dropped down a lot. my guess is over the next couple, you add to this every year as a need comes up. Is that correct?
Correct, there will be, as there are more needs that arise, we will
Yeah.
have to make some changes. Now, the study that ECI did, that's not gonna change. It's only gonna become more important, because as we grow, the wires that are undersized are gonna be even more undersized. And so those are things that we're gonna have to address. But other things may arise, 3-4 years down the road, we may realize that we have issues that we didn't know that we would have and need to address. So yes,
Yeah.
there are things that may.
And that's just part of the budgeting process as you go through and understand the needs. So, okay.
Yep.
Got it.
So just for those listening, the reason that we're having this conversation is because this is our third council meeting where we're talking about interfund transfers, specifically transferring money from the power department to the general fund for expenses. But we wanted to make sure, and as a council, great questions have been asked, that we don't use money that you're going to need. We don't want to cripple you in any way or put you at a disadvantage with the power department. So that's why we're continuing to have these work sessions. So appreciate your schedule. We had some other questions. Go ahead, Councilmember Hunt.
Okay, I mean, I have a bunch of questions. Some of them are kind of in the weeds, so if it's not the right line of questioning, just let me know and I can let it go. So I guess, and I think what they all boil down to is what people are going to want to know as far as their power goes and their power funds. And is their power service, I guess, as good as it can be, and will this affect it? So, and so I guess we got some data on outages. How much, I guess, does a typical outage cost the city?
Yeah, that's actually, I actually wrote next to your question there. I don't know how you would answer that.
Okay.
Because there's so many variables in every outage, depending on whether it's overhead, underground, how long did it take us to find it. It could be something super simple. Also, there's times that we're able to find the outage and we can get everyone back on power, and then we can address it during work hours. That's what we try to always do, to reduce the amount of time after hours working on it and that nature. But there's just so many variables. It's just so spotty all over the place. And then there's also the variable that if it is an outage that's caused by a car accident, we bill the insurance and we receive back money that cost us to make those repairs. And so I don't personally, maybe someone a little more savvy than me might be able to do it, but I don't personally know how we would compile an average number
Okay.
on that.
Okay, and that's totally fine. That makes sense now that you bring it up, and that just exposes how little I know about how power works, which is great. And I had a lot of these answered before. There's a lot of perception, I guess, in some areas of town that their power maybe is not as robust as in other areas of town. I guess a couple questions there. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like we're making progress in areas of town where it's not as good? And I guess, can you explain some of the progress we're making and kind of your timeline that you have on that?
Yeah, most definitely. As you guys know, as I mentioned before, we're starting the rebuild of King Clarion. Our crews have made some phenomenal progress already. Of course, it's all backyard work. It's down gullies, it's in steep inclines, and it's some rough terrain. It's rocky, and it's hard to dig in rocks. But we just barely had an outage where we replaced 10 poles. There's a whole section of line, and we had every guy, including myself, in backyards working to make it more structurally sound. And so we are making great improvements there. I know that there's a lot of history to outages in that area. I sat down with Brett, our operations manager, this morning, and we looked at the difference. We found about 2 years ago, we found some very key trouble areas in that area. And we feel like since then, we have seen a very dramatic decrease of outages in that area. But I also feel like there's a mindset that has developed over many years that we're always out of power. And unfortunately, it's gonna take some time for residents of Kaysville to be able to trust that we are now a more sound infrastructure. There's still a lot of improvements we want to make and see. My hope, my goal is that in about 5 to 7 years from now, we have addressed all major outage concerns. The boring of Direct Berry, the rebuild of King Clarion will be complete, and that we really will be pretty limited to no more equipment failure, or minimal equipment failures, but our outages will be more weather-related, animals, those types of incidences that we really don't have any control over, or you know, people on their cell phones drinking and driving, that kind of thing. We don't have the ability to foresee or correct. So that's kind of my goal and the direction I want to go.
Do you mind if I ask another question, Mayor?
Oh, absolutely, go ahead.
Okay, well, I guess it's two, but I forgot one. So if we have an excess, like if we had an excess, you said 5 to 7 years for a lot of that, and this is not any kind of a question of your ability to get things done, but if you had, say, maybe more employees, or were able to use an excess for like a contractor to do short-time stuff, do you feel like you could get the projects done more quickly, and do you feel like that would be a good use of funds, or would it just be kind of
Yeah,
a waste?
no, definitely. I mean, more personnel always equals a job getting done in a more timely manner. But then again, you know, will you effectively need them long-term down the road? No, you won't. And there are definitely give and take with contractors. You're not getting the work done maybe the way you want the work done. Kaysville has had contractors working here before, and it was done before I even came to Kaysville. And I can go up a pole and I can tell you if Kaysville did it or if that contractor did it. Because if that contractor did it, it's not done with the same quality, because they're about getting in, wiping the work out, and getting paid and leaving. Now, with that being said, I do feel like there's a place for contractors. We are entertaining in future years, when we get into that gully work and we get into some of the more treacherous parts, not necessarily contracting out the build of the lines, but helping us get poles and framework and stuff like that in, so that we can get it done in a timely manner. And so, kind of a yes and no to your answer, if that makes sense. There's a place I feel like that they would be very beneficial, and then other areas that I feel like it'd be a waste of resources.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Mayor?
Oh, yes,
Can I ask Brian a
Shane.
question?
Shane.
I don't want to say, are you okay with us transferring money from your fund to another fund? I think that's not a fair question, but I think that if we involve you in this process, I think that's obviously essential. I don't know if you want to speak to this idea in any way. I don't want to put you on the spot, or maybe this is something that you just want to think about. But I wonder about Proposition 5 when it passed, and how much Gary and the power people were like. As a city, I think we were kind of against it, but maybe as a power department, they were like, yeah, let's do this. This sounds great. Don't take any more of our funds. So, do you have any opinion about this? Obviously, we do want to involve you, and I appreciate you, and I don't want to poison the well here, but taking the whole of the city in how you see things, because I know that that's what you do.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that question. So, with this, of course, it's always nice to say, oh, I got all the money, right? But we're a city, and that's my perspective on it. is we are a city. And of course, I have my needs, and as long as my needs are met, and as long as I have the reserves that I feel like, and Dean, working with Dean and Levi and the other city administration, as long as I feel like we have the appropriate reserves for tragedy, for emergencies, for transformers in a substation that may go down, for improvements, for future improvements, for rate stabilization, those types of things, I feel like it could be very beneficial, and it's not uncommon, but we could give back beyond those reserves when we have excess reserves. I support it. I do. I think it would be something that we could use if it's above those excess in reserves, and we meet the demands and the numbers first, and then we have that ability to use those funds in other areas, ways that would give back to our community, ways that would be able to serve our community, the emergency response teams with the police and the fire, with public works and parks. Parks is a huge one. You know, I think that there's definitely room there that we can provide means and abilities to give back. And I would love to see that. I would love to see our power department be fruitful enough that we would be above the reserves that we need to a manner that we would be able to feel very, very comfortable in that regard.
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
Councilmember Oaks.
Yeah, so asking a different way. So if we did this transfer for the fire department, would it preclude you from getting done what you need to get done?
I don't know, because I don't know how much you would take, and I would have to look
Okay.
at.
You'd need Dean to,
That would be something we'd have to sit down and crunch numbers. What effects would that have? What areas of my reserves would it come from? How much would it pull? And what would that look like?
okay, that's fair.
Yeah, good question. All right, thank you, Brian. Appreciate your time. Do we have questions for Dean and Levi? Councilmember
I
Blackham.
would just like to say, and this is kind of a whole budget type discussion, but I think that's why this is here. It's kind of a budget type discussion, and that's a work item, and we're discussing it. Because I really think, and I know there's more than this, but I look at, there's pretty much 3 revenues to a city. There's property taxes, sales tax, and then some other thing, you know, I mean, but mostly those are what we see, and there are enterprise funds. And I would love to see somehow in our budget, and I would love for the council to be able to say, okay, property taxes we try to use to pay for the gifts that keep on giving. That would be employees, yearly things that come in that we do on an annual, every year basis, that we have those things, okay? That's property taxes usually, and we say, those we're going to be able to count on every year, they're coming in here. Sales tax and enterprise funds. I mean, I'm all about being transparent about taking the enterprise funds and using them in excess, and I would even more so like to see it such that we have gone through our budget this year, we have gone through this process, we're having a public hearing now because we want to say, we want to take $1 million from the power fund, the excess power fund, and we would like to put $300,000 towards a fire truck, $300,000 towards this, $200,000 towards this, and be very specific on what we were planning on. And our hopes in doing this is so that we are able to reduce your property tax burden, your annual burden. We're hoping this is I would love to see us be able to say, we're using these sales tax because we've had a good year. We've had a good year in power. We have excess funds. Our needs aren't so great. We're using these revenues for these one-time expenditures. We're trying to keep and leave our ones that are annually, every year, employees, all that stuff. We try to do that with the money we know we're going to get every year. When we're asking for these extra fire trucks, or we want to do something special in a park, or we want to do this. We want to take your money as a business, as Kaysville City operating as a corporation. We have excess power funds this year that we feel like we can use by helping pay for some of these one-time things. And when we have the public hearing, I'd like it such that it's very clear, very specific, what we're going to take, how much we're going to take and what we're using it for. And because we're going to do that, we don't have to raise your property taxes that $1 million more to pay for that and leave that excess in these other accounts. That's really what I would like to see.
Right, and I think that we're in agreement, that's, as a council, I was going to say, I think that's what, yeah, he just wanted to share that, but that, we are in agreement that that's what we want to do.
But that's what
Our perspective is, if we plan for this and it's programmed
Right.
and it's part of our process and it's transparent, we're in favor of that. I think what we wanted to do tonight was to, first of all, identify that there are some needs in the power department. Sometimes we maybe don't recognize all the needs. And over the next 2 years, it's probably a couple $1 million each year. And there's still some pending decisions in addition to that. So our purpose tonight was to express the need and then maybe answer the question of what's the appropriate amount of money
Right.
to have in the power fund.
Yeah.
And how do we finance those needs? So if you look at every one of these, they all come from power fund monies. If you look at off to the left, impact fee facilities plan, IFFP, those are projects that are eligible to be paid with impact fees. So over the next couple of years, we can use impact fees for several of those projects. Maybe let me talk a little bit about cash reserves and what's appropriate. Scroll up a little bit. Oh, maybe I'll just scroll down first. Okay, several years ago, the city council adopted a cash reserve policy indicating what's the appropriate amount of reserve to have in the power fund. And so it's made up of three components. 180 days of operating expenses, your largest capital contingency, capital component, like a big transformer to go out, and 10% of your prior year resource cost. So if you were to look at that, you'd say, ideally, you got to have about $9.7 million in reserve for your power fund. Now, a few things have changed since then. We now have a retention fund at UAMPS of about $2 million. So you could probably take off item 2 and item 3 and be where you'd want to be, about $8 million. Can you scroll down now? Oh, the other way, I'm sorry. So if you look at where we are, that column E, unrestricted, we're about $9.2 million in unrestricted funds available.
Meaning that funds that could be moved, potentially, right? Okay.
Yeah. So that would be, if you're shooting for 8, you've got about $1.2 million
Okay.
in excess. And then you've got your impact fee balance that you can use for some of those projects. So the power fund's healthy. It's in a good position. I think as we approach this coming budget, we want to do the very thing that we're talking about, is saying, are we meeting Brian's needs? And if we are, then is it appropriate to use power fund monies for public purposes?
Councilmember Adams, yes.
So, yeah, I feel like we're all on the same page. Looking at this though, so say we were to liquidate it down to 8, which again, I think the purpose is not for us to say, oh, we've got 1.2, let's spend it. It's to say like, we have reasons to do it. And like Mike said, I think, the other option is was always, my thought with the Proposition 5 was, well, so do you guys want us to write checks back to you at the end of the year and everybody gets a $20 check? Instead, what we're doing is we're putting it towards things that will benefit the city. That's why I like Nick's wording in the ordinance, that it's for the welfare, safety, welfare, and health of the citizenry. I think that's the point, right, is that they donated to, or they've paid for it, and so we're putting it towards things. And I think big item tickets, like even this fire truck, we could have something put on the fire truck that says paid for by the power, citizens of Kaysville Power Company, you know, or something that, like, kind of like how we're doing with the ramp tax, to like say, like, look, you helped pay for this. But my question for you is that, so say we drop down to 8, do you think within a year's time, does that 8 go back up to 9.2, or does it follow kind of this same scale that you have here, where it's like, it seems like it's only going up like $400,000 a year?
Yeah, if you look at this same schedule, you look at the last 3 years, you can see unrestricted.
Yeah, it's like
18 was 7.2, then
Depends.
7.1, it went down a little bit, then it was 7.9, now we're 9.2.
so I don't think we're going to be able to rely on every year pulling $1 million. And
No, and that's the process. Every year we evaluate it and say, you know, are there adequate funds available? Or do we do rate reduction, or, you know, any number of things that the council can decide to do.
Okay, great.
Well, and for that reason, I do like the idea of using it for one-time purchases. I don't think we need to limit ourselves to doing that, but I do like the idea of doing that.
Yeah, yeah.
And kind of just having that in our mindset, because if we do anything else, it's not a dependable source of income.
Yeah,
It's not a
it's-
consistent source of income, let's put it that way.
Yeah, you can't like,
'Cause it
but
just
you can't
depends.
pay wages with it.
I mean, potentially you could, but not a lot, you know.
Oh, they do?
But if you
Bountiful
can't
does-
count on it.
Right, but if you can't count it, we shouldn't do it,
Right.
I think, so.
Unless it's programmed, I mean, you could say, we're gonna program $500,000 every year.
And you have a
General
center,
fund, and you just
yeah.
count on that.
I mean, Bountiful does do it. They just do it percentage every year. It's the same. They disclose it. They send out their mailers and,
So what if
And they
they're,
pay
what
for
if they're
whatever.
7, I mean, if they did that, if we did that, then our unrestricted fund would go, and it did follow the same path. I mean, it could go to 6, it could go to, I mean, you're taking $700,000 out every year, and you're only bringing in 1.
yeah.
That's no good.
Right.
So I like the idea that we keep, and I don't know if we need to write that, I think it is written, oh, Nick just left. I think that's kind of one of the things that you wrote in the ordinance, is that it has to do with keep the enterprise fund, or that the electric fund will maintain a cash reserve as established by the governing body.
Right.
Which is our $8 million, right?
Right.
Yeah, the last page of the handout has the current,
Yeah.
I guess, same thing,
He's talking about the draft ordinance.
I guess what I'm saying is, in the draft, that's what you're talking about, is that we're not committing to same thing as
No.
Bountiful.
Right,
We're
we're
saying,
not.
yeah, we're gonna pull 10% regardless. We're saying, no, we have to keep it at the,
Make sure our cash reserves are sufficient and meet our goals, and then we
Great.
reevaluate it every year.
I like the ordinance. I think
Yeah.
it's well written.
I like it
Okay.
too.
Do we have any other questions for Dean? No? All
We're
right,
gonna
thank you,
make a
Dean. Appreciate it. Okay,
I'll make a motion that we move the draft to an action item.
okay, we have a motion.
Yeah, I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Councilmember Adams.
Aye.
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 Okay, motion passes, thank you. So we'll move that draft ordinance to an action item, or to a, yeah, action item for the next meeting. Thank you. Okay. All right, our second work item is item B, discussion about a public information officer position. I'll turn the time over to Shane. Okay.
Thanks, Mayor. We have, over the years, had a lot of discussion about a public information officer, sometimes called a PIO. So it's not a position we currently have in our city. There have been several instances that have happened where we have required the assistance of a PIO. Some of us have gone to some training for how to be a PIO, and some of that has been very helpful. But it's been one of those things, and we've done some of these other things in our city where we're collaboratively posting on social media and collaboratively talking to the media and trying to pick the best person to do that on a case-by-case basis. And that's worked for us for the most part. But having a professional PIO would be helpful. Officer Benson in the police department has served as the PIO for the police department. She's been an invaluable resource for us, and she does a myriad of other things where she doesn't do that full-time and can't do that for our city full-time, has to be a police officer as well. So, but that's been very helpful. Mr. Belknap's here tonight because he uses public information officers and public involvement officers a lot in his big projects. So if he goes to Mountain Hollow or Shepherd or whatever project it is, he has often contracted with a firm to involve the public and to mitigate concerns up front, and that's been very important for us. So this has come up tonight because as he's interacted with some of those firms, he's had an individual that has expressed interest in working for the city if we had such a position, and would be willing to do so for part-time with no benefits. And as far as getting the most bang for our buck, we would, I think, do that with having that position available to us. And this would also allow Mr. Belknap and other department directors to allocate funds that are set aside for consultants to do this kind of work, to be able to do that internally. So that's really why we're talking about this tonight. I don't know, Josh, if you have anything to add to what I've said, but what we're just looking for is maybe two things. We think this is a position that warrants a job description, whether we hire somebody or not. So if we could add this job description to our toolbox, that would be good for us, even if we don't do this right away. But it would be our recommendation to hire somebody starting maybe in January if we could. And maybe Josh, you could talk a little bit about why you think we can afford this and what you budgeted for other projects.
Yeah, it's kind of an unconventional time and approach to this. You know, normally positions are part of that budget process as we're going through late winter and into the spring. But as Shane mentioned, we had an individual that we work a lot with that I felt like, you know, has done a phenomenal job. Make a passing remark, you know, man, if Kaysville ever gets a PIO, let me know. You know, they live in town. We've loved working with them and caught me off guard. Gosh, are you serious? This is something the city's talked about for a while. So not knowing, you know, how serious they were about that, I always put in money into part-time wages each year as a just in case. I budgeted funds this year, you know, just in case, you know, if that's something that individual were interested in. This individual is currently on maternity leave and would be coming back to work in January. So we budgeted those funds as a just in case there for them. And again, not the traditional process, but it's a very unique situation. You know, we don't typically put the cart before the horse, so to speak. But yeah, as Shane mentioned, I think there's general value in having this job description ready at some point. And also to echo Shane's sentiments in terms of the value of good, consistent, and uniform communications, timely communications with the public, which I know, at least in my regard, is one of the biggest difficulties that we have in public works. So.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any comments or discussions? Councilmember Hunt.
Josh, can I ask you a question? Sorry. I'm just wondering, so you said you've had to kind of contract with other people or have like part-time work do this. Do you think having a staff on hand would save us money in the long haul? I
think the biggest thing, flat out, I don't think it's a cost savings. You know, it's a quality and timeliness issue from my perspective. You know, I think another good example is when we had a city engineer. It wasn't a net savings, but in terms of what Public Works and Community Development have benefited from that individual overseeing the development process, coordination, plan reviews, things like that, has been a huge step forward. So that's kind of a long answer to a short question. Certainly, ability to see some cost savings, you know, in projects, utilizing an individual like this where we have a project going on, we're utilizing their services internally rather than paying more for contract services externally. Net savings, probably not an overall savings.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Adams.
Oh, yes.
Did you-
No, I'm jumping ahead of those guys, but that's right where I'm glad that you brought up the city engineer, because that's right where my head went, was, I know that we had a pretty big discussion, and at some point in time, it'd be nice to have a little bit of report on, because that was a big decision to hire a city engineer, and, you know, are they sitting around half the time, or are they working all the time doing stuff? Because that was kind of the concern, right, that we could have had contracted it out. Is that how you feel this is? I mean, similar, like, you said it's going to be part-time. And that's the only thing I worry about is like during the 5 months that we don't need, or that we're not doing anything, or that there's no project going on. Or do you guys see as staff, do you see us always having something come up?
I think from a day-to-day operations standpoint, certainly there are going to be moments where, hey, you know, the city has a big kind of focus or push going on. You know, we're wanting to do some major community outreach. You'll see a lot of involvement there, but day-to-day, power outages, water leaks, emergency communications, as Shane mentioned, something comes up and we're interacting with the media, and having one individual rather than, you know, the 6 or 7 or 8 different departments trying to manage their communications, both for mundane day-to-day tasks, but also a critical emergency situation, having one individual manage that and communicate that. So, cool. I don't know if that answers your question. But in terms of the city engineer, it's been amazing to see the timing, especially as you see a departure of an individual like Lyle. You know, I feel like we would have been in huge trouble without Dexter coming on to bridge that gap and seeing that, yeah, he stays crazy busy.
Yeah, good.
Can I add
Thank you.
something, Mayor?
Yes.
I think one of the reasons we haven't really pushed the PIO is because I wondered too if it was a full-time position. So I kind of feel like this is going to be I think we have enough work, like you said. It might be 40 hours one week and 5 hours another. I think it really would ebb and flow depending on what's going on. But I just don't think it is a full-time position for us right now. But I'm also worried that, you know how these things go. You get somebody in there and then you're like, well, why can't you do this, this, and this too while you're doing those things? And I worry about that creep. But
Yeah.
because honestly, I did a presentation at the city managers conference a couple weeks ago regarding some of the 4th of July activities, and I asked who had a PIO in that room, and most of the cities our size do have a PIO. I'm not trying to shame you into doing this position, and we're different, and we can do the things we've been doing, but I think there's a lot of things we're not doing from a communication standpoint that we would just do so much better with somebody heading that up. You know, if I'm in charge of Facebook, that's a real struggle. That's gonna be not good.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So luckily I've got the mayor that will do some things, and Anne Marie does a great job, and we kind of do it as a team effort, but there's some things that are slipping through the cracks because Anne Marie's our city recorder, she's not our PO. The PIO, the mayor's doing a gazillion things, and we just don't always catch it all. So what are the opportunity costs is also an item we're thinking about in reference to this position.
One other item, as you talk about part-time, again, we're a little different than the normal approach where we're talking about an individual, and this individual's indicated that they don't want any more than 20 hours a week. Typically, they want to stay lower on that, and I totally understand from a family perspective. So yeah, as we talk about part-time, it's not 32 hours or 35 hours.
So Josh, I have a question. Well, first a couple things, and then I know, Mike, you're wanting, and I'm jumping in before you. So I wasn't convinced we needed a PIO previous to some of the things that have happened lately, but it would be so helpful. I mean, when we had our tragedy, it was really nice that we had Lexi for sure. And then I had a friend reach out who's the CEO of one of the hospitals, and I sit on the board, and he said, hey, you're going to need to talk to people. Nate actually texted me and said, hey, you're going to have to talk to people. You're going to have to talk to the press. Be prepared. And it was really helpful to have that support, but it would have been really nice to be able to have someone who could present something professional and give it to me so that I had, because, that was a new experience for all of us. I will tell you, I get media requests pretty often, actually, 2 this week. For city stuff. It would be nice to be able to continue our communication. It would be awesome to be able to say, okay, here's the overview of, city council. I honestly don't have time to write up a whole thing, and I realize we have, YouTube videos to watch and stuff, and the minutes come out, but it'd be so nice to be able to say, hey, here's this. Clearfield does really cool interactive maps, and there's just a lot of great information that we could provide for the community as we're working so hard on transparency and increased communication. I do have a question for you, though. So you said you budgeted for this position this last fiscal year. In the future, would you be able to live within the budget that you've used this year with this position moving forward?
Yeah, so the amount that we had budgeted for is just over 20,000.
Okay.
And which is similar to what we're budgeting for part-time wages every year. And that's certainly manageable going forward, especially as Shane mentioned. If each department were shouldering that 20 hours a week for this individual, you're talking, maybe $7,000 a year per department as they chip in there. So
Okay, so you don't
very much manageable.
Manageable. You don't anticipate your ask being bigger as a result of a part-time position. Okay, Councilmember Blackham.
My only thing is I think there's a lot of things you can justify. I always do think you can justify a lot of things that come in. My only problem is I don't have all the other departments here telling me what needs they're going to have, and that usually comes at the budget time of year. And I'm not saying if you don't need this person, you've got the money apparently, and if you need this person for a specific project you got starting in January, I don't know why you couldn't use them for that, because as a contract person, because that sounds like you've used her before as a contract person, so I don't know why you couldn't. But before I say let's make a description of this job and create a job permanently as a permanent part-time, I would have to see it come at the time of budget, because I would want to see all the other needs of the other departments to see where they're coming in at. I know we're in dire need of probably a part-time code enforcement person. We are probably in dire need of a fire marshal, part-time or whatever. And so I know there's a lot of needs that I don't know right now, and that usually comes at the budget time. That's why I'm uncomfortable with a position in the middle of the year. And if you're saying you got a one-time thing you need to use her for, you've got the money, you've used her before, contract it, then I'd say go use her for it, But to say we're going to create a job description and make it a permanent part of our Kaysville City budget for the gifts that keep on giving year to year, I would have to wait and see what all the other departments are coming in with.
Hey, Councilmember Oaks.
Yeah, no, and my concerns as I read this over the week were the exact same, is that this is something that we saw in the spring as we went through the budget process, and so why now? Why can't we wait? And then if we agree and think it's necessary, and you're right, look at the other departments, it's funded and we start in July. And that was my recommendation, my question, what's so pressing that it has to start in January? And the other question that as you've talked, you have an individual. So is this a position that we would not be interviewing for? And do we get in trouble by not doing that?
No, I think you certainly could interview, put that out, advertise still. I don't think you tie your hands at all in that regard.
Okay. I mean, that was just a concern when you say you have someone you've used, and that just seems like you get into other potential problems.
I think the other point is, if the individual were here tonight, I'd say the same thing. I don't think there's anything so pressing that, my goodness, if we don't have it now, we're in big trouble. You know, we don't have the state breathing down our necks if you're not compliant because you don't have a PIO. But as this has come together and communicating with this individual and indicating that, yeah, there is interest there, we decided to come now and start talking about that. Again, that's not a, please work with us right now, or else situation for us. But I think that there's certainly benefit to moving sooner than later. But completely, we're here as a work item. This isn't an action item. This isn't a consent item. This is a discussion with council. Just as we talked about in the previous item, in regards to budget, we're here to discuss and get input and feedback from council. So.
Thank you. Councilmember Jackson.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to that as well, Councilmember Oaks and Black and White. I completely agree with you 100%. Because this is out of our typical budget discussion and process, unless it was a dire need, I would propose that we shelve it for now, but gather information from all the departments and figure out the needs, because I do think, Mayor, that you bring up a really good point. But yeah, I would like to hold off on creating a position now, but by all means, yeah, if you have the money, contract it out, but I'd prefer to wait for the typical process.
Okay.
This is an item that has been discussed with each of the departments, all department heads, in discussing that. But I again, right off the bat, acknowledge as we're talking about this that even though it is a budgeted item, it's not the typical timing timeframe schedule that you typically see with staffing. So.
Mayor?
Thank you.
Can I
Yes.
make one comment?
Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, from a recommendation to staff, like a lot of the times work items, we give you recommendations, right? I don't know what the rest of the council would feel about this, but I'm glad that you brought it to us now and that we're talking about it. And maybe, yeah, what we're saying is that we don't want to like say, let's make a position, but can't you guys make the decision that you're going to, over the next 6 months, maybe use this person for all departments and figure out a way to pay for her without our approval? And then when you come to us, for the budget process, say, hey, we've been using this person. We've tested the water and we like this and we want to make a job out of it. Does that make sense?
I think there's a way to do that. It would probably be more of like a 1099 contracted employee and somebody that we could bring in. Now I can't speak for this person if they said, well, I don't want that. That doesn't sound very secure to me, so I'm not going to leave my current position or stop being a mom or whatever it is.
Right.
But yeah, that's definitely something we can entertain.
Does that make sense though? Like
You
it's
never
like
stop being a
like
mom.
it's like a collective. I guess what I'm saying is like as a collective, you guys could pretty much do this without our approval.
I think that's what makes this unique is that Josh, a PIO wouldn't normally just be Mr. Belknap's employee. I don't think that's where we would put a person like this. Probably be more like in Administrative Services Director with Dean. Or I don't even know, actually, I haven't even thought about it. But Josh is just passionate about it. He deals with these individuals on a probably almost daily basis between some of these different projects, and so he was passionate about it. And it is unique in that it would be shared by the different departments. But what you've proposed doing in the part of the budget process is probably what I think you and I talked about. Is like that's probably what the council. If I was guessing, that's what you would do, and that's a totally appropriate thing to do. There's nothing earth-shattering about waiting, and that's ideally that's what we would do as well. So. Came up because it came up.
But I still think it'd be smart to like share her, the contact her. So you use her. I say her.
Services.
I guess we figure because it's maternity leave.
It's a her.
Can't be certain. Anyway,
Yes, you can.
but anyway, and Mayor has a chance to do the same thing with all her requests and this and that, so that we have Because that was the big thing that when we were hiring an engineer, we didn't really have the data. This way you'd be able to, like 6 months from now, be able to say, hey, yeah, look how many times we used this person, all of the departments used, I don't know.
So would we need to
It's just a
decide, because I'm okay with doing like a temporary contractual, short-term.
I don't think we need to.
I don't think we need to
Do you
decide
that
anything.
from
Do we
us?
need to do that?
Probably
or-
not.
You've got the money, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So we can, Josh and I can meet and, discuss this with this person or how you'd want to proceed with some of your projects too. So.
I'm excited to see it.
All right.
Budget.
So the action could potentially be to create a job description. I'm hearing that you don't want to do that at this time.
We can wait on
Is that it?
At budget time, let's see
Okay.
where the other
Okay.
departments come in, and then
Okay.
we're gonna have to do the hard decisions then and say, this is probably
Right.
more appropriate at this time than this, we only have this much money.
Okay, so we will not move this to an action item at this time.
But we don't want to discourage.
Yeah.
But Josh,
I
yeah.
think we feel like you're
Yeah.
interested in.
Yes,
and
yes,
so,
yes.
Yeah, we'll do our best to
Perfect.
Okay.
get that out more.
Okay, thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
All right, council member reports. Does anyone have anything they'd like to report? Councilmember Blackham?
Just, was it Monday night? Monday night, Abby, the mayor, and I went to a presentation that was done by the Wasatch Front Regional Council, and they had UTA there, and
Brian and Josh were there, and
Brian and
Dexter
Josh were
and
there,
Shane.
and who else was it?
Shane.
It was the UTA
Oh,
and Wasatch Front,
UDOT.
and also the trails, the
Oh, yeah, the
the-
trails people.
transit, what is it?
Tran-
Transportation, active transportation.
Yes, thank you.
And they had some maps up there, and they wanted us to get up there and be interactive with the maps, and Abby and I had the opportunity to get up and talk to the people with the active transportation, the bus, basically the bus route guy, or it was UTA, UTA. Talked to UTA and said, right now, Kaysville basically only has one UTA route, and that's through Main Street going through town, and we said, we'd really, now that there's a hospital out in West Layton, and we're getting more in the West Davis corridor, and they didn't have anything on their maps for us really in the future, did they, Abby?
Not very many projects.
Not very many projects for us, and so we voiced our opinion of, say, hey, we would really like to see, especially with the West Davis corridor coming in, and the park and rides, we would like to see, because they didn't even have, they were not even showing bus on the West Davis corridor.
Oh, really?
But what they were saying is, this might be a great area where you could do where you get 6 or 7 people and they provide a bus for a carpooling system. And so at least we got Kaysville on their radar in the West Davis corridor. And then we also, the active transportation, we talked to them and learned a little bit about funds that you can get. They said that they will do a 60% match if you have a project for active transportation. So let's, just for instance, let's say we decided to put a 8-foot wide path from the freeway to the West Davis corridor on 200 North, and we had a project like that. They said that there's monies there that they would match 60% if we had 40%. So isn't that what he was saying? I think that's what he said, they would match active transportation.
I'm not sure if they would match 40 or 60.
I thought they would match 60 if we did 40, or maybe it was the other way, but it was a pretty good match. And then what else we looked at? Obviously, I voiced my frustration with 200 North, with 200 North and UDOT, and it's kind of crazy because they're going to completely rebuild the entire freeway system from Farmington South, and we were actually in, I guess they have it in numbers of 1, 2, 3 of how their projects go. And we were in number 1, but unfunded.
Oh, then how are we number 1?
Obviously, there's a need, but there's no funding, but there is funding for the rest of it going south to North Salt Lake. So it was kind of interesting to see, but it was at least, hopefully, we got on somebody's radar a little bit, maybe.
Great, thanks for calling.
What do you think, Josh? Did you?
He fell asleep.
I don't know. I mean, it's good to get your, I guess, squeaky wheel eventually.
He
I
would
don't
like
know.
to have a PIO there.
Right, to report back on it.
We put a lot of ink on a couple of the maps, voicing our opinions about, obviously, we're going to argue for Kaysville, and I don't think we're being unreasonable there. I don't think we're being super biased. I think the needs, especially in terms of I-15, that was probably the biggest thing that we pointed out. That process, as they're looking at the environmental impact statement for that project, our request was, stops at Farmington. What's the difference between here and here? Unfortunately, we were unsuccessful there, but it's great to get a lot of organizations talking and working together, and luckily this is continually updating, just continually being squeaky.
Thank you.
Abby, do you have anything else to add to that or anything?
Covered it.
Anyone else have anything to report? Okay, I just have two quick things. I really appreciate our IT department, Ryan. He's participating in a state cybersecurity assessment program, which will result in grant funds for our cybersecurity program. So it's a great opportunity. I'm grateful that he's willing to do that because it will take a little bit of time on his end. But it's great for Kaysville. And so it's opportunities like that we have that we want to take advantage of, and that's because we've got good relationships. So, secondly, Kaysville, Bountiful, and Layton are sponsoring a first annual elected officials Christmas open house. So you guys have the invitations for that. It's December 20th. It's here at Kaysville City Hall in our council room. So please plan to attend that. That would be really helpful. We've invited all of the elected officials in Davis County, and it'll be the first time we all get together for something like that. Yes, spouses are invited if you'd like to bring them.
It's an open house, right?
It's an open house. It's from 5 to 7. We'll just have hors d'oeuvres, and it's a little mingle.
And Mayor?
Yes.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
How this actually kind of came about is the mayor and our council, we had several conversations about how a lot of council members from other cities just don't get together and talk. And so I think this was kind of birthed out of that
It was.
desire to get to know other council members so we can share notes and be more effective as we help our cities,
Right.
especially in terms of helping our cities when the state gets a little heavy-handed. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. That's true. Okay, well, thank you. So, city manager report. Shane?
Mayor, I just wanted to mention that we're making an effort to have just one meeting in December, and we thought it might be nice to not have the 1st and have the 15th, and we'll probably do the audit at that time. And we're reserving the right to have the meeting on the 1st, but right now we're planning on just pushing everything to the 15th. There's some presentations and some things that are going on, but not a lot of actual work items. So if you have any concerns about that, but that, I know you love having lots of meetings, but the 15th would be our last meeting of the
Should we make a motion? Yeah, we'll approve
Sure.
that.
You're supportive of it?
You're supportive, okay.
That's all I have tonight, Mayor. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate everybody being here. Motion, does someone want to make a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, everybody.